The snow had buried the road so completely that Sarah Whitmore almost drove past the man lying beside the fence. The Wyoming blizzard had turned the world into a white wall, and every sensible voice inside her told her to keep going. But then she saw one gloved hand moving weakly beneath the snow, and Sarah slammed on the brakes. She had no idea that stopping that night would change the rest of her life. If you believe that kindness, hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Sarah owned a small ranch outside Cody, Wyoming, a place she had inherited from her grandfather after spending most of her adult life caring for him. She was 38, independent, hardworking, and quietly lonely. The ranch kept her busy from sunrise until dark, but every evening, when the horses settled and the wind moved through the empty fields, she felt the weight of how quiet her life had become. She had learned not to expect anyone to stay. People made promises, life changed, and eventually everyone seemed to leave. That evening, Sarah was returning from town with supplies when the storm became dangerously strong. Visibility disappeared within minutes. She slowed her old pickup to a crawl, praying she could reach home before the road vanished completely. Then, near an abandoned wooden gate, she noticed something dark against the snow. At first she thought it was a fallen tree branch. Then the shape moved. Sarah stopped. She found a man unconscious beneath the snow, his coat covered in ice. He was alive, but barely responsive. Sarah called for emergency help, but the nearest road crew warned her that the storm had closed the main highway and rescue might take hours. She could not leave him there. With every ounce of strength she had, Sarah pulled the stranger toward her truck and eventually managed to get him inside. She wrapped him in the spare blankets she kept behind the seat and drove slowly toward the ranch. His name, she later discovered, was Caleb Bennett. For 2 days, Caleb remained weak and confused while Sarah cared for him. A doctor from the nearby town eventually reached the ranch once the roads opened and confirmed that Caleb had suffered severe exposure and needed rest, warmth, and time. Sarah never asked why he had been traveling through such dangerous weather. She simply made soup, changed blankets, fed the horses, and checked on him whenever his breathing became restless. On the 3rd morning, Caleb finally told her what had happened. He had been riding across the country to settle unfinished business after leaving a construction job in Montana. He had spent years running from mistakes he regretted, especially the way he had abandoned his younger brother, Nathan, after a family argument. Nathan had died unexpectedly months earlier, and Caleb had been carrying the guilt ever since. Sarah understood something about regret. She told him that sometimes we spend so much time punishing ourselves for yesterday that we fail to notice there is still a tomorrow waiting for us. Caleb recovered slowly. When spring finally began melting the snow, he was strong enough to ride again. Sarah expected him to leave. In fact, she quietly prepared herself for it. She had already become accustomed to the sound of another person's footsteps in the kitchen, and she knew the silence would feel different when he was gone. One clear morning, Caleb saddled the horse Sarah had lent him and rode away. Sarah watched until he disappeared beyond the cottonwood trees. She told herself it was for the best. 3 weeks later, she was repairing a section of fence when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the valley. She turned and saw Caleb riding toward the ranch. But this time, he wasn't carrying a travel bag. He was carrying a toolbox. Caleb had found work in a nearby town, but he had returned because he wanted to help Sarah repair the ranch. More importantly, he wanted to stop running. He had spoken to Nathan's widow, apologized for the years of distance, and begun rebuilding relationships he once believed were permanently broken. Sarah smiled when he reached the gate. He told her he had realized something during the weeks away: the ranch wasn't simply the place where he had survived a storm. It was the first place in years where he had felt like he belonged. Spring passed quietly. Fences were repaired, horses grew restless in the green fields, and Sarah slowly discovered that companionship didn't always arrive with grand promises. Sometimes it came on horseback carrying a toolbox. Sometimes it stayed for dinner. Sometimes it remembered how you liked your coffee. By summer, Caleb wasn't a guest anymore. He had become part of the ranch. One evening, as the sunset turned the Wyoming mountains gold, Sarah stood beside the fence where she had found him months earlier. Caleb walked up beside her, and neither needed to say much. The place that had once nearly become his grave had become the beginning of his second chance. And the woman who had stopped for a stranger in the middle of a blizzard had unknowingly saved more than his life. She had reminded him that he was still capable of belonging, loving, forgiving, and beginning again. If this story touched something inside your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories about kindness and hope. And before you go, leave a comment telling us this: have you ever shown kindness to someone without realizing how deeply it might change their life? Sometimes we think the smallest act will disappear into the world unnoticed. But kindness has a way of traveling farther than we can see. Sarah stopped because she saw a stranger in the snow. Caleb came back because someone had reminded him that he was worth saving. And sometimes, the person you rescue from the cold is the very person who helps warm your heart when your own winter finally ends.